Hello and welcome to Skyline, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Driti Atri. Well, tonight we are looking at 10 stories that kind of tell you something much bigger than what their individual headlines suggest. Because when you put these stories all together, well, a pattern that begins to emerge. For Indians living abroad, for Indians planning to move abroad, study abroad, working abroad, or simply dreaming about better life overseas, the world is changing. And the biggest question that is no longer simply which country should I go? Well, the bigger question is how secure is the life I am building over there? Well, these are not any 10 disconnected stories. They are 10 pieces of one much bigger global picture. So let's start with the first one tonight. The American dream is beginning to come with a very different warning label. More than 5,200 Indians were reportedly deported from the United States, and that too in the first 15 days of August. And this is according to the reports provided to TimesXP. And you know what makes this particular story significant is the kind of people who are being caught in this changing immigration environment. Ladies and gentlemen, the concern that is no longer limited to people who entered the country illegally. The report says that deportation list also includes Indians who entered the United States on visas. Visas such as H-1B, O-1 and student visa. Now, stop for a moment here and think about what that really means. These are not simply people crossing a border without any sort of permission. These are the people who had entered through recognized immigration channels. These are professionals. These are students, people who had come to America with education, employment, and career plan. And yet, their immigration journey, it can still end with a fight back to India. Well, according to the reports, the United States has significantly increased arrests and deportation, while ICE issued removal order to 801 Indians in June alone. But you know what? There's another distinction here. A removal order does not necessarily mean that a person is immediately put on the plane. There can be appeals, there can be legal proceeding, there can also be voluntary departure. But here, the message that is coming out of these developments, that is unmistakable, that is very clear. America's immigration system is becoming much less forgiving now, and specifically for poor Indians who are just there to build a better life. And yes, then there is another detail that is very shocking. The report says that some students have faced action over alleged violations such as traffic offences, while some others, they were accused of posting criticism of Mr. Trump's administration on their social media account. There are also the cases of an H-1B worker in Texas who lost his job. You know, under the normal H-1B grace period, he had some time to look for another employer. But according to the report, while doing part-time work at a restaurant, ICE raided the establishment and he was taken over, well, allegedly on the basis of visa violation further. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where the whole story, it becomes extremely important for specifically Indians who are living in the US. Because when you are on a work visa, a mistake, it is not always just a mistake. A job loss is not simply a job loss. A paperwork issue is not simply a paperwork issue. And an immigration violation, it can have consequences that go far beyond a fine or a warning. According to the report, the history of deportation, it is massive. In 2025, 3,567 to be precise Indians were deported from the US. And this is according to the figures cited from India's Ministry of External Affairs. Then in Feb 2025, 104 Indians, they were flown to Amritsar on a US military plane. In fact, images of people being restrained during that deportation process, it created widespread controversy here in India. Now, put all of this together. For years, the message to Indians, it was study hard, get the degree, get the H-1B, get the job, build a better life in America. But today, there is one new sentence that needs to be added. Know the rules, follow the rules, and understand how quickly your immigration status, it can change. Because you know what, the distance between I am legally working in America and I am being sent back to India. It can sometimes become frighteningly very, very small. And yes, that brings us to our next story tonight, because what happens when the immigration system, it does not deport you, but your job that disappears. Well, for many Indians, the H-1B visa, it represents success. A good salary, a corporate job, a comfortable apartment, business trips, basically a life that looks very different from the one that they left behind in India. But one Indian professional discovered just how fragile that life can become when the job disappears. His name is Vinay Maheshwari, originally from Indore in India. He had studied in America, he had built a professional career over there, and then came a phone call. Just 15 minutes. That was enough to change everything for him. His manager told him that he was being laid off. And yes, suddenly this whole problem, it was much, much bigger than unemployment. You know why? Because Mr. Maheshwari, he was in America on an H-1B visa. That meant he had a limited period of time to find another employer who's willing to sponsor him. According to his account, by the way, he had about 60 days that generally H-1B visas holders have. Yes, 60 days. Think about that number here. 2 months to find a new job. 2 months to convince the companies to hire somebody whose immigration status, it is tied to the employment. 2 months to prevent your entire life in another country from collapsing. Well, he applied to hundreds of jobs. Recruiters showed interest. And then came the question, what is your work authorization? And after that, silence. No rejection, no explanation, just silence. His savings began disappearing. He tried to buy himself more time here, but eventually he found himself kind of in a situation that would have been almost impossible to imagine when he was working in a corporate America. Well, he took up a temporary cleaning job at a hotel in North Carolina. In exchange for accommodation and food, he cleaned the rooms. He made beds. Yes, at techie. He's cleaning rooms, he's making beds, and he described the contrast himself. Just months earlier, his company had been putting him up in Marriott hotels during business trips. Now he was holding a mob. You know, that one image, it tells the entire story. You know, the fall was not from luxury to poverty in just one dramatic moment. That's not the story. It happened through a series of ordinary things. A job disappears, a few weeks pass, savings shrink, applications go unanswered, and suddenly the professional identity you spent maybe years building, it becomes irrelevant to the immediate question, how do I survive in America anymore? But yes, there is an unexpected twist here. Mr. Maheshwari, he later said that his time at the hotel, it was actually refreshing. Yes, people there, he did not care about his H-1B. They did not ask about his work authorization. They did not ask when his visa expires. They simply asked where he was from. They asked about India. Well, for the very first time in a very long time, he felt like a person rather than a visa status with a countdown on his head. Eventually, he returned to India, and his experience became the basis for his book, Rerouted. The title itself, it's powerful because that is what happened. His route changed, and perhaps the biggest lesson is this. Going abroad is only one part of the story. Nobody talks enough about what happens when the route changes, when the job disappears, when the visa clock, it starts ticking above your head, when the dream has to be rebuilt somewhere else. And that brings us to an even more complicated story, because for one Gujarati man returning to India after years in America, it did not mean going. That's right, for the 15 years, this Gujarati man was living in America. Then he was deported. But his problem, it did not end when he landed in India. According to the reports, the 51-year-old man from Jasalpur in Gujarat, India, had gone to America in 2011. And he had not returned to India for about 15 years. He was eventually arrested in the United States and he was deported. He landed in Delhi on June 29th. But you know what? When Indian authorities checked the passport that he was carrying, something did not add up at all. Well, the passport appeared suspicious. Officials checked its details, and the investigation reportedly found that The passport had been issued in Ahmedabad in 2018, but the name connected with the passport, that was different. The photograph and other details were allegedly connected to another person. So basically, in other words, the document that he was using, it was allegedly tampered with. Now, here's the part that makes this particular case even more puzzling. Ladies and gentlemen, the Indian Embassy in the United States had reportedly issued him an emergency certificate before the deportation process. So yes, there was already a legal route that was available for him to return to India. Then why did he allegedly use a forged passport? That's the biggest question. That's the question that remains central to this particular investigation further. Well, according to the report, the man was arrested by Delhi Airport Police and he was taken to Gujarat for further investigation. Police are also looking into where the forged passport came from and how exactly he managed to live in the United States for so many years. Now, there is another broader issue here. The report describes cases in which undocumented Indians rely on agents to obtain passports or documents. People living abroad may be unable to renew the passports in the normal way. An agent may promise a solution and what looks like a shortcut that can eventually become a trap for you. You know why? Because an immigration officer, he does not need hours to examine the entire history of the document. The passport number can reveal information almost instantly. And if that document, it is allegedly fake or tampered with, the consequences, it can follow the person all the way back home. In this case, the man reportedly remained in jail in Delhi even after a month, facing charges under various provisions, by the way, including the Passport Act. So the lesson, painfully simple. A difficult immigration situation, it can tempt people into desperate decision. But a fake document can turn an immigration problem into a criminal case for you. And yes, now let's move from a deportation story to something much more unsettling. Because in our next story, the family had a valid American visitor visa. They landed at the US airport. They had traveled to America before, and yet they were put on a flight back to India. A visa is permission to travel to the United States, but a visa that does not necessarily guarantee entry. Well, that distinction, it has become increasingly important. Well, according to a report by I Am Gujarat, the case of the family from Ahmedabad who arrived in New York on valid visitor visa, it is shocking. They had traveled to America maybe multiple times before. In fact, this was not their first trip. But this time, it went terribly wrong at the airport. After immigration, their luggage was examined, some household items, they were found, and questions began. Why were they carrying these items? Why were they traveling with household goods? And if their visa, it was, nearly expiring, well, did they actually intend to remain in America permanently? According to the report, all 4 family members, they were questioned for an extended period of time. Eventually, they were denied entry. Their visa were revoked and they were sent back to India on the next flight. Now, the objects themselves, they are very, very important. Let's talk about that. The family had reportedly carried utensils and other household items for the relatives in America. Now, you might be wondering, there's nothing unusual about taking utensils from India to the US, right? Indians family abroad, they regularly use utensils and other familiar household products from their home. But you know what? The concern at the airport, it was reportedly not simply what they were carrying. It was what those items might indicate about their intention here. And then another factor entered the entire picture. The family reportedly had several close relatives living in America. Again, having relatives in America, that is not a problem or illegal stuff here. But from an immigration officer's point of view, multiple factors can be considered together. Let me tell you what. The visa is nearing expiry. Well, there are household goods in the luggage. There are close relatives in the United States, and the officer wants to know, are you actually visiting or are you planning to stay? That is the bigger question. And in the meantime, if the officer becomes unconvinced, the consequences, it can be serious, just like this. And yes, the report also mentioned other examples where items found in luggage created suspicion, including documents and food products. The broader message that's clear. When you travel internationally, specifically to a country with strict customs and immigration rules, your luggage, that is not just your luggage. It can become part of the entire conversation about why are you traveling? In fact, what are you carrying? Who are you visiting? And how long you intend to stay, and whether your answer that matches your visa category or not. Because immigration officers, they are not only looking at your passport, they are looking at the entire picture here. And now, after hearing about people being stopped at the airport, there is a question many Indians may be asking. If you already have to wait so long for a US tourist visa appointment, can you simply pay more and get an earlier slot? Here the answer is yes, in some places though, but there is a catch here. A very big one for Indian applicants specifically. Time is money. And now, in some US visa location, the American government is testing whether money can also buy you something else. Well, an earlier appointment, that's what we are talking about. The US State Department has expanded a pilot program allowing certain B1 and B2 visa applications to pay an additional $750 for access to earlier visa interview appointments. But before you start checking your nearest US consulate, wait, there is a catch. India is not included, well, at least for now. The program applies to certain participating US embassies and consulates. Applications still have to follow the normal process here. Well, they must first pay the standard MRV fee for B visas. That fee is listed at $185 in the supplied material. Then, if an expedited appointment is available at a participating location, the applicant can choose it. And then comes the extra charge, $750. And that payment, it has to be made within a short period of time to secure the appointment. But let's make one thing absolutely clear here. This is not a fast-track visa approval. It is only an earlier interview appointment. Paying $750, it does not mean congratulations, your visa has been approved. It simply means you may get to sit across the consular officer earlier than others. While the pilot is currently described as running through December 31st, 2026, the participating locations include several missions in Latin America and elsewhere too, while India posts, they are not currently part of the entire program. And you know what? That means that applicants using the US consular posts in Chennai, in Mumbai, in Hyderabad, New Delhi and Kolkata, they cannot currently use this $750 expedited option here. Now, could India be added later? The State Department says additional locations may be added during the pilot. So the door is not necessarily closed forever. But for the Indian travelers today, the regular process, that remains the route here. And this particular story tells us something interesting about modern travel. The demand for international mobility, it is huge. People are willing to spend money to save some time. People are willing to pay extra simply to get an appointment here. But the whole system, it still does not promise the outcome that they want. And yes, while travelers are trying to get through American borders, America itself is looking at a radically different way of controlling one of those borders. Not just with officers, not with cameras, but with machines, humanoid machines. What if the next border patrol officer you see, it is not a human? Well, they may sound like science fiction, but the idea that is already being discussed. Sanket Pathak, an Indian origin entrepreneur and founder of Humanoid Robotics Company Foundation, has been pitching the use of humanoid robots for security applications along the American southern border. The concept that is futuristic, but the problem it is trying to solve, it is pretty much real. The US-Mexico border contains difficult terrain, extreme weather, remote area, long distances. Basically a place where sending human officers, it can be extremely difficult. So, what if a machine does not go there first? A human that can move through difficult terrain. A robot that can detect people. A robot that can conduct activities. A robot that can operate in conditions that may be dangerous or exhausting for the soldiers, for the humans? Well, Mr. Pathak has reportedly discussed these possibilities with the Department of Homeland Security officials. His company's Phantom Mk1 humanoid robot has also been pitched for military application, including the Russia-Ukraine conflict. But you know what? Let me make it very clear. The concept is not necessarily that a robot replaces every human officer. Well, the proposed system is more like this. The robot goes out, it observes, it detects something unusual, it sends information back, and then a human officer decides what happens next. Well, that distinction, it matters because the biggest question around artificial intelligence and robotics, that is not simply, can a machine do this? The bigger question is, should a machine be allowed to do this? Specifically when we are talking about borders, when we are talking about security, weapons, human life. According to reports, Mr. Pathak, he has indicated that his company would be willing to arm the robots if requested by the government. Although the machines, they are not currently, envisioned making enforcement decisions independently here, but who knows the future here? And yes, there is another challenge. Whether a robot designed for a laboratory, it is one thing. A robot expected to work in dust, rain, heat, rough terrain, that is something entirely different. The company is therefore working on more rugged models that could be waterproof or maybe dust-proof. But yes, there is an interesting backstory here. Before foundation, Mr. Pathak, he founded Synapse, basically a fintech company that provided banking infrastructure to maybe other financial tech firms here. This company raised more than $50 million. But the company later faced financial problems, layoffs, bankruptcy, and now Mr. Pathak is building something completely different. Humanoid robots. And yes, the fact that these robots are being discussed for border security tells us something important here. The future of borders, it may not simply be about more people at the checkpoints. It may be about technology watching from the ground. Sensors, AI, robots, automated surveillance, and perhaps one day machines that can move where humans cannot. But yes, while technology is changing the physical border, there is another border that remains very human, the border between communities. And when prejudice crosses that particular border, it can show up in crime statistics. That brings us to our seventh story tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Well, here's the statistics that demand attention. Overall reported hate crime incidents in the US that declined in 2025. But reported offenses motivated by anti-Sikh and anti-Hindu bias, that went up. According to the FBI data cited in the reports, there were about 10,600 something reported hate crime incidents in 2025. That went down. That went down from 11,404 in 2024. So overall, the number went down. But inside that larger number, there was a troubling trend. Reported anti-Sikh hate crimes, that increased. Reported anti-Hindu hate crimes, that's also increased. The FBI data listed around 189 anti-Sikh offenses in 2025 in US as compared with about 152 in 2024. Well, for anti-Hindu bias, the number rose from roughly about 25 cases to 32. And that translates to increases of approximately 24% of anti-Sikh offenses and 28% for anti-Hindu offenses. And this is according to the report provided to TimesXP. Now, numbers like these, that need context. The FBI does not classify Indian Americans as one separate racial or ethnic category in the data. And participation in FBI's hate crime reporting system, it is voluntary for law enforcement agencies. So these numbers do not necessarily capture every single incident. But you know what? They do still raise an important question here. Why are some communities seeing an increase in reported bias even when the overall number of hate crime that is declining? In the meantime, for Sikh and Hindu Americans, this is not just about statistics. It is about how safe people feel in their own community. It is about whether a person can walk into a workplace, school, place of worship, or public places without worrying that their identity will make them a target. And yes, there is another concern here, as one advocate cited in the report put it. The danger is not simply that hate goes unaddressed, it is that hate can become invisible. That is perhaps the most frightening reality today. You know why? Because when incidents, they are not reported, they disappear from the statistics. And when they disappear from the statistics, they can disappear from public attention too. Now, for Indian origin community in America, this is an important conversation. The Indian diaspora has grown rapidly. With growth comes visibility, and visibility can sometimes bring both acceptance and hostility. So, this particular story, it is not simply about numbers, it is about the question every single immigrant community usually asks. Well, do we feel like we belong here or not? And yes, that question takes us perfectly with our 8th story here, because there is an Indian couple in America who has reached a rather unexpected conclusion. Their message to young Indians dreaming of moving abroad: don't come. That's right. Well, for decades, the dream was simple: go abroad, get a degree, get a job, earn in dollars, build a better life. And for millions of Indians, America became the ultimate destination for them. But now, an Indian couple living in the US is telling young Indians to think twice. Suhas and Priyanka shared their views in a street interview, and Suhas was blunt. His advice: don't come. Now, that sentence sounds shocking, but his explanation, that is more complicated. He says that when he and Priyanka moved to America, India was a very different place. Getting a good job, it was harder. Building a certain standard of living, that was more difficult. America looked like obvious opportunity to them. Study there, find a job, build a better life. That was the perfect dream. But he believes the equation has changed now. Well, he argues that India now offers many of the opportunities that once pushed young Indians abroad. And then Priyanka pointed to growing investment and business activities here in India. But perhaps the most interesting part of their argument, it is not about money. It is about personal cost. Leaving your parents, leaving your friends, starting over, building a social circle from scratch, trying to feel accepted. Here Suhas said that even after years in America, he still don't feel completely accepted there. And yes, that's a powerful admission, because migration is usually measured in salary. How much can I earn? How much can I save? How big a house can I buy? But what about everything that cannot be calculated easily? Think about that. How many birthdays do you miss? How many family emergencies happen while you are thousands of kilometers away? How many years do you spend waiting for permanent residency? And how many career decisions do you make because of your visa status? And most importantly, what happens to your spouse's career? What happens to your children? What happens when your parents, they grow older? I'm not giving you a guilt trip here, but it's a reality. These are the costs Mr. Suhas also said people should consider. And yes, there is an interesting contradiction here. If he believes India is now a better option, why is he not moving back? Well, his answer, it is equally revealing. He has already built a life in America. He has already paid the cost of moving there. Well, going back would mean paying another huge cost here. So his point is not necessarily America is bad. His point is, would I make the same decision today? He said no. And yes, that is a very different question here, because migration is not a one-line calculation. It is a life decision. And today the calculation is changing. Visa uncertainty, green card delays, employer dependence, distance from the family, spouse's career, children, social belonging, cost of living. All of these things, it matters the most. And perhaps the biggest change is this. For earlier generations, going abroad, it could feel like the only way to move forward. For today's generation, for Gen Zs, the choice, it may be more complicated. Stay, go, study, return, build in India, build abroad, or do both at the different stage of life. And yes, while Indians debate whether America is still the dream, our next story takes us somewhere else. The United Arab Emirates, and this time the allegation comes from a Pakistani politician. A cancelled flight, stranded passengers, a hotel, and an allegation that has triggered a diplomatic conversation. Former Pakistani National Assembly Speaker and PTI leader Asad Khasir, he has alleged that Pakistani travelers were denied hotel accommodation in the UAE following a flight cancellation. In fact, his claim that was very specific. He said passengers were told that accommodation would be provided only to people holding Indian and American passport. Well, he raised the issue in Pakistan's National Assembly and called on the Pakistani government to take it up with UAE authorities through diplomatic channels. According to his account, he was himself traveling in the UAE when the flight was cancelled. Passengers needed accommodation, but he alleged the treatment given to Pakistani travelers that was unfair. He described the whole situation as inappropriate and questioned why Pakistani passport holders would be treated differently. Now, this is an allegation, and that distinction matters. The claim, it needs to be understood as what it is. A statement made by a Pakistani political leader rather than an independently established fact in the report. And who can trust Pakistan? That's the big question. But the diplomatic significance, that is obvious. The UAE has a huge South Asian population. More than 1.5 million Pakistanis, they are estimated to live there. And this is according to the report. That makes the relationship between Pakistan and the UAE economically and socially important. But what are Pakistanis doing here? Recently, Pakistan urged their own citizens living in the UAE not to be beggars. In fact, millions of families depend on Gulf employment. Remittance, that is also a matter. Business ties matter. And therefore, even an individual allegation involving treatment at an airport or hotel, that can quickly become a diplomatic issue. He also called on Pakistan's foreign ministry to investigate and raise the matter through diplomatic channel. Well, the bigger question is not only what happened at that hotel. It is also how do passport and nationality shape the experience of international travel. Because your passport is not just a travel document. It can influence visa requirement, border questioning, transit rule, entry procedure, and sometimes, as this allegation suggests, even how you are treated when plans suddenly go wrong. But yes, there's one final story tonight, and this time we are going back to America. Not the airport, not immigration, not the border, but the home, the house, the place where people thought they had finally built stability. Because in Jersey City, a large Gujarati community is now facing a completely different kind of pressure. And this one comes in a form of tax bill. You buy a home, you pay your mortgage, you pay insurance, you pay for groceries, you pay for utilities, and then your property tax goes up by 15.5%. Well, that is the situation creating anger in Jersey City tonight, New Jersey, and this is according to the report. Jersey City has a large Gujarati Indian population, and residents have protested against a proposed property tax increase. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a report by I Am Gujarat. In the meantime, the mayor, Jason Solomon, he says the increase is necessary because of the city's budget deficit and financial pressure. But residents have a very different argument here. They say that why should ordinary families pay the financial problem created by government decision? That's a big question. Now, the original proposal, it was reportedly even higher, by the way, about 20%. But after public opposition, the plan was being considered at 15.5%. After that, residents gathered outside City Hall to protest further. And their concern is straightforward here. The cost of living is already rising. Home insurance is becoming more expensive in many parts of America. Mortgage costs, they can be heavy. Rents are increasing. And incomes are not necessarily rising at the same speed as expenses. So when property tax rises sharply, homeowners feel it. And renters may feel it too. Because landlords really absorb every increase forever. Some of those costs can eventually find their way into rent. And that creates another problem here. People who are already struggling to afford housing may face even more pressure here. The mayor's side of argument is equally straightforward, by the way. The city needs revenue. If taxes do not rise, officials warn that there could be cuts elsewhere, layoffs, reduction in public services, and difficulties managing financial obligation, including an emergency loan taken by the city. So, this is not simply a story about tax increase. It is a story about city trying to balance its books while residents trying to balance their household budgets. And those two calculations, they do not always match. Well, for the government, a 15.5% increase, it may look like a financial necessity. For a family, it may look like another bill that simply cannot be absorbed. And there is a wider concern for Gujarati community. Housing costs are already under pressure. The supplied material. It also highlights concern about rent-related disputes and fraud affecting the landlords. So residents fear that higher property taxes could push rents even higher and add more pressure to an already expensive housing market. And yes, this brings us to the end of today's 10 stories, ladies and gentlemen. But really, we are not ending with 10 stories. We are ending with one question here. The question that, should Indians stay in India and build something of their own, or should they be trapped in the US visa system forever? I'm Driti Atri, this is Skyline, and I'll see you in the next episode.